All right, well, good morning. Thank you for coming out, for the rain, for enduring the rain. Day 2 of the summit. We were in this exact room yesterday. We hosted a security and ethics talk, so at least I know what I'm set up for. And if you can't see, if you're in a different space, feel free to come on in and join us over here. So I'm going to get started. My name is Janeen Uzzell, and as I mentioned, I'm from New Jersey, was born and lived a little bit right around the corner. In fact, I found out yesterday from a good friend of mine that this is Central High School. And so this building is now being a part of the NJIT campus. So 60 years ago, my aunts and uncles all went to high school here. My mom went to high school down the street, but at Barringer. But I found out that I'm actually standing in the building where members of my family were educated. So that is a cool thing for me. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Voice, for getting me back to New Jersey. My mom is excited. I'm excited. I'm going to see my nieces and nephews and lots of folks from my family on this weekend, so it's good to be here. I am a technology evangelist. I'm an evangelist overall, so whether it's technology or other things, could be food, potato chips, soda, whatever, I can evangelize it. I am also a diversity and inclusion advocate, so I'm very passionate about the causes, particularly in technology, that relate to diversity and inclusion and the fairness of how coding and programming is actually managed. I'm also a mechanical engineer, have worked in products and technology design, most of my career being spent outside of the United States, overseas, most recently living in Africa and just coming back to the States. And I'm also a Jersey girl, so that's great for me. So we're going to get into this and have what I think is going to be a great talk. This is going to work. Because we tested it, but now it looks like it needs to warm up again. Here we go. All right, let's see if we can get some volume going. Are we set? I love technology. I love that too, right? This one-liner has become a classic in conversations. It's been repurposed on television and in talks, spoofed on SNL. I've even heard it used in the pulpit at churches. So a lot of people use this expression. It creates a lot of humor. I heard some laughs out there. And it's just a great one-liner. There are tons of GIFs that can be posted on your social media where you see Chris Tucker very dramatically and slowly talking to his co-star in the movie Rush Hour. Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? I guarantee you, many of you have said it. You've heard someone that said it. You've laughed at it. And so even though Jackie Chan, he has this blank stare on his face, we later find out, if you've seen the movie, that he is 100% literate in the English language, and he does understand the words that are coming out of his mouth. And so it's interesting to say, why is he looking at him in that way? But that gaze can resonate with each of us as we seek to understand the words that are coming out of each and every one of our mouths. All of us are saying things, and we're all seeking to understand what we're saying. Every culture and every generation uses some of the same words. They just use them differently. They use them to mean different things, and we still often don't understand what we're saying. Terms like groovy or you get my drift. My nephew says you feel me, you dig, you understand what I'm saying. All of these things are exactly what Chris Tucker was trying to express. But different words mean different things to different people in different cultures at different times. Ultimately, we're all seeking to understand the words that are coming out of each other's mouths. And that's hard enough for humanity. So you can only imagine what happens when we link technology into the mix. Getting machines to understand the human language is one of the hardest tasks of AI. And if we aren't intentional about how we support the programming of the systems that are leading the technology of the future, then we're going to continue to experience the iniquity of bias in all of our technology. Today I'm going to address bias as a barrier to success, specifically on the AI voice platform. And I'm going to present diversity as a practice that must be the foundational intention for all of us in order to have profitability in our products, in our processes, in the industry, and in the global markets. Because the future is AI. It's going to happen. The question just becomes, will we be responsible enough as a society to make the necessary changes in order to commit to getting it right? And this way it flourishes for all of us, and it really does bring out the best in each and every one of us. Diversity, bias, technology, these aren't areas that I've had to research in order to understand them because they're a part of my daily life. One, I'm a woman. I'm a black woman. I'm a black woman in technology. I'm a black woman that has held leadership roles in the private sector at major corporations. I'm considered maybe an expert in some areas of technology. All of these things kind of give me access granted to like a PhD in bias and the offensive and hurtful, disappointing experiences that can come as a part of that. Diversity stares me in the face every day, and I have to look back at it, and then I have to shift in order to fit into the boundaries and the expectations that other people set up for me. And some of you may experience that exact same thing. And that then becomes a barrier to my authenticity and the freedom of who I truly am. And if that's my experience or your experience with living, breathing human beings, what happens when, once again, we start to introduce technology into the mix? How does technology hold on to the emotional quotient that comes from human beings? Well, actually, the technology we know is subject to the software, which we know. The software is subject to who? The programmers, every one of us that are sitting at those keyboards. And so when there's a lack of variation in culture, gender, race, sexual orientation, lifestyle, it's evident that bias will be built into every one of the codes. And it's not always intentional, but often it can be. Therefore, the end user is now subject to the bias, the ignorance, maybe the racism on the part of the technology leaders, any of us that lead technology teams, who have the responsibility of ensuring that there's a broad representation, a representation that looks like this, sitting in every one of the product rooms, sitting at each and every one of the keyboards throughout the cycle of the technology advancement. So this little algorithm that I wrote, it's just meant to be fun, but it's also often true. You start out with the sample size, all of us that write algorithms, enter row. Is row white? Yes. Then here's your next step, and then we end up with the final product. Is row not white? This could actually go on to say, is row a white male? Yes. Then we come back to the final product. Is row a white female? Yes, we come back to the final product. If row is not any of those things, then the question simply becomes, what is row? And that is the source of barriers as it relates to diversity. And row could be anything. If I were in a room in Africa, then I could say, is row African? And we would still have that same problem because then we're not designing for other cultures outside of what we're used to. So that is the source of some of the diversity challenges that we have. But diversity and ethical issues, this isn't anything new. The role of ethics in technology has been around, especially in the early parts of the societal reflection of technology. And the impact is farther reaching when there's no intention. I started out saying it's the responsibility of the leaders, but the impact is even far more impactful when there's no intention on the behalf of the actual programmer to strive for any tactics or processes that will make technology truly diverse. So it's our responsibility collectively. It's also my responsibility individually. My team and I told you that I worked overseas. So my team and I experienced this firsthand with a project that we worked on. And so we took a product. This is an actual ultrasound machine. If you've ever seen ultrasound, it stands about this big. Looks like a washing machine. That's what we call it. from a technology perspective. And I worked on a team for over 10 years that transformed washer machine technology into handheld technology, something that fits in the palm of your hand. And then I spent those 10 years taking this product into parts of the world. This just happens to be Indonesia. But the point I'm making here is that I'm here talking to you about this and how to get it right when I've done it wrong. This product was supposed to be a culture shift that was going to promote independence and a rising fleet of entrepreneurs, women like this that work at Puskesmas that could have their own business by having portable ultrasound. It was going to help meet the United Nations Development Goals. I was an advocate for the UN and a partner with them to help countries meet the MDGs. It was going to generate incremental revenue for the company that I work for, so we were going to get paid. And then ultimately we were going to do something that matters most to me, which is impact lives globally. So it was the golden ticket when it came to a technology that could go into the market, until it wasn't. And so if you ask why, one, because we hadn't assessed the solution
All right,
from
thanks,
the
Greg.
actual heart.
That was some really helpful look back. And I love how clearly that Netflix example. Hello?
That's voice AI for you.
All right, thanks, Greg. Yeah, that
I
was
couldn't
a
have asked for
really
that
helpful
even
look
better.
back, and I love how
So
clearly
we hadn't assessed the
Netflix
solution
example
from
demonstrates where voice.
the heart of the end user. Okay? Okay.
I just got
We hadn't assessed the solution from the heart of the end user. These people here.
I'm not getting that.
We didn't have a team that truly represented the cultures that we were selling to. We had a diverse team, but we didn't have a team that had ever lived here and designed for this space. We didn't know what we didn't know. And instead of choosing, we chose to operate from a place of like self-knowing. I even want to say this, it was arrogance, to be honest with you. And so despite our great efforts, our massive expenses, we spent a lot of money working on this over the years. We didn't reach a turning point until the day that we actually sat in a room in a very rural part of Africa with people like this, no whiteboards, no voice AI, no major technology, just pen, paper, and a group of end users that helped us to get to the destination of where we needed to be. And everything changed because we did design what they needed. This product is definitely what they needed. It does what we needed to do. It just isn't what they wanted. What they wanted was this product, but they didn't want it to be handheld. They needed something to hold on to it because they don't have pockets in their wraps to hold things and keep it from dropping. They wanted it to not, believe it or not, they didn't like the color. They didn't want it to be that color. They said it gets too dirty in the field and it looks old and people wouldn't want to see it. It didn't look professional. It didn't make them feel good about themselves. Something as simple as a color. So there were so many simple things. We knew that the technology is what they needed, but we didn't give them what they wanted. So we eventually launched an updated version, and we were very successful. I'm very proud of it. We were considered pioneers in emerging market technologies, and this product did ultimately do what we needed it to do. However, I have to refer to this consistently, one, because I'm proud of the work, but most importantly because we learned a lot about the importance of the diversity of our teams, the diversity of our practices, and even the diversity of our coding. I don't code anymore, but the team that actually programmed this needed to learn a lot about what we actually needed this technology to ask the user and how we needed it to work. And so I refer to this often when I'm speaking to other companies and leaders about how to practice diversity. So I'm glad each of you, we'll just keep it there. I'm glad each of you made the bold step to join this workshop today, and I can assure you that you're in the right room. We're here at the largest voice summit of the year. There's over 2,000 attendees here over the next 3 days, 175 speakers, over 200 workshops. There's just so much information that you're going to be able to explore over the next 2 days that are left. Evangelists, developers, devices, partners, and we're all here on a united front to understand how to get voice AI to the next level and how to make it better. And so while we're all here to sharpen our skills and to enhance our technology understanding, I applaud and I thank each of you for choosing to attend a workshop where emotional quotient is actually the area of interest, and then understanding the value of why a topic like this would matter as it relates to technology. So good for you for joining. This is not your typical technology session. So I'll start by saying there's no such thing as a neutral algorithm. And I showed that to you in the algorithm that I wrote earlier. It was set to the bias of me. Why? Because my question to the algorithm was, is Roe white? I didn't ask it if it was African. I didn't ask it if it was a girl from Jersey or if it was a mom from Jersey. I asked it if it was white. Because all algorithms are subject to the bias or to the intention of the person that designs it. And that's just what was on my mind when I wrote it that night. So the act of creating inevitably involves choices that will affect the properties of the final product. What if I was designing a product and I decided to make that my outcome? In my former role, I was the head of women in technology for a company called GE, and I spent, maybe you've heard of it, I spent a lot of time internally with our business CEOs, members of like talent acquisition teams, several members of human resources, and also the thousands of women that made up our technical workforce. And I also worked very externally with members of diversity and inclusion, people that had roles similar to mine that worked at other major tech companies. And we were focused on the big swings that needed to be in place in order to change how women in technology were hired, recruited, how they were promoted, the types of work that they did. And we all agreed that there was a problem. And we had data that proved that all of us were doing this work wrong. And we knew that if we didn't get in front of it quickly, we were destined to be the misrepresentation of diversity, parity, and fairness, specifically as it related to women in technology. So we knew that we were in trouble. And here's what we identified as some of the disparities in STEM and diversity: oppression, privilege, prejudice. These are some of the things, stereotyping, that you'll experience in STEM and in diversity, and maybe you all have experienced some of this. For example, in the area of research, particularly in the STEM space, we need more women and more diverse women to be a part of the samples that are determining some of the products and the outcomes that are being designed. A report by Harvard Business Review showed that women control more than $20 trillion in spending a year. Women, $20 trillion, with their average incomes, the average income of women totaling more than $13 trillion. The percentage of research studies that we're actually a part of, and I'm talking about all women, not just black women, is nowhere near proportionate to that. Minority buying power also is missed out, but it's very powerful as a part of some of the sample sets. In 2014, Hispanic populations accounted for 1.3 trillion in the economic contributions, and that amount is larger than the economies of all but 15 countries. And yet they also are missing in some of the sampling that is happening for the design of technology. And voice is a part of that. They're not included in that area as well. So diversity is also key for gaining insight to some of our key consumers. Research has shown that women, diverse women, minorities, millennials, they approach their careers very differently than their counterparts. Often they're seeking jobs that allow them to make a difference on a local or a national level. They're looking for more spirit-driven work. They're looking to code and design things that matter to them, to really do work that matters. So this approach to diversity is critical and very important because we need to inform the industry and deliver research and products that otherwise may go simply missed. Because if you're not considering this, one, you're missing out on an end user, but you're also missing out on the type of product that can be delivered. So bias in algorithms refers to societally unacceptable processing decisions that disadvantage people or groups on the grounds for which there's actually no legitimate justification. So you're being outsourced without any legitimate justification, just because a person doesn't know, or maybe they're being intentional about not knowing. This can be software decisions that are inconsistent with legislation. So the software legislation, the law says that we have to be open to areas of age, race, gender, and sexual orientation. That's the law. So when you're designing and coding, you're supposed to be able to show a balance here. But there's also a group of people that could be missed in the bias because they're not explicitly protected by legislation. And that we can all think of some unique ways or unique groups that could be. But a couple that I thought of are, for example, people that work the night shift. They're probably not someone that we think about when we're designing. Or an emerging market entrepreneur like this woman. She's not someone that's going to come to your mind when you're designing, unless you have a team in place that can help do that. And these are people that we also need to consider. Some of the ways that biases are being introduced into the programs and systems that we use are typically through data sets that we talked about used to test the code. Again, if these people aren't in the data set, then we're going to have some bias in the delivery. And the consequences lead to the exclusion of services that could help people. Because as we're designing, if you think about all of the things that we're learning while we're here at the Voice Summit, the future of what voice and AI are, how are we ensuring that it speaks to the needs of these people? Some of these examples can also include things like qualifying for a credit card or a loan or government assistance. This again shines the light on an iniquity in a very different industry like banking. And so you're starting to see roles like data integrity officer or chief content diversity leader in industries like that, because it's very important for them to start to think about what the questions are that they're asking or the data that they're collecting when they set boundaries on how their apps are being used. Or, eventually you can apply for a loan and do a lot of your banking right online. You imagine being able to just, well, now you can, but there are some new areas in banking that are coming along where it will all be the information that you put in, and then it's going to run studies on your facial recognition, your history, and in some cases that is not fair to people that may need to still be able to have a more aggressive interaction with someone. And so these roles are being put in place to ensure that there is a fairness across the board for all people. But it's not a quick move, and there are plenty of people that will be left out, unfortunately, until it comes up to speed. Again, the problem that we're talking about isn't new. It goes all the way back to just the beginning of time when we've had racism, when we've had class systems. As long as that is in place, we'll always experience this, and we'll have to work even harder to make sure that we reach beyond it. So again, I'll say algorithms are as biased as their designers, who can have good intentions and just not know. They may be racist or sexist or culturally biased. Some research has even said that algorithms can be the pivoting point or the jumpstart to ignite racism. And some of that we may be experiencing in what we're seeing in algorithms that we're not even aware of in the politics of today. In 1977, Mario Bunge, he's an Argentinian philosopher, he termed the phrase technoethics. So he was the first person to begin to talk about and argue that it was the responsibility of the technologists and the scientists to develop ethics as a branch of technology. So once again, we see early on that when a technologist has no responsibility or no commitment to the product, the result will be evident in those that bear that burden of the disparity. Also, recently in a book that Sophia Umoja-Noble wrote, she says this about machine learning. I want to read it so I get it right. AI, or automated decision-making systems, will become a human rights issue in this century because machine learning algorithms use data that is already biased, incomplete, and flawed. And we are now teaching machines how to make decisions based on that information, and it will lead to disparate outcomes. These problems cost the owners of companies, shareholders, those of you that are stockholders in companies, venture funders, investors, they cost us all very greatly. The end user, the customer, is also subject to an incomplete experience or, dare I say, no experience at all if, once again, we're not delivering to the full customer. So the cultural divide is influenced by unbalanced points of view. Financially, we'll have issues with market share, brand positioning, customer loyalty, employee retention. These are all impacted when there's no diversity across the coding platform. And ultimately, technology, a tool that has been meant for our good and to advance societal goals, and the products that we've designed will have a negative outcome in both the short and the long term. So again, just the bottom line, and this is kind of, where you pull in your business leaders and say this is what's being impacted. Product limitation, poor customer experience, and decreased market share are critical. And these are all outcomes that are the exact opposite of what our intention is, presuming that we all of us that code and that work in this space actually have the intention of putting out a product that's good and serving the world in the way that we actually know is the best way to do it. So we have to constantly ask ourselves, can machines truly see things the way we as humans see them? And then when we say that, we also need to ask ourselves, who is the we that we're referring to? Another fact that we can take away from here is that omission is evident. Even machines are that are well-versed have data-driven mistakes. So omission is evident. It's always going to happen. We can only continue to do the best that we can. Diversity remains a mystery to AI. It's not something that the system's figured out yet. And then algorithms are always to the fault of the coder. Here's a great example. This is my friend Joy. I don't know if any of you have seen her TED Talk. Have any of you seen her talk? Millions of people have seen it, and I encourage you to watch this talk. She's fantastic. She works at the MIT Media Lab, and she's a good friend of mine, and I want to talk a little bit about what she's finding out in facial recognition. So she calls herself the poet of code. She also leads the Algorithmic Justice League, and her goal in the league is to ensure that there is fairness in voice recognition, facial recognition programs. But what's key here is that Joy identified that in her robotics programming, she was unable to be identified by the robot. This is her with white face on, because the picture in the background. Because when she was programming the robot does not identify her as a face. It says not a face. And so she just did a sample and took a sheet of paper and put it over her face, and it said, that's a face. And so she was able to actually code and program. So now she's made a mask to be able to code what she's doing. But she's also teaching and growing the sample set, because it's not just her face that it doesn't recognize. It wouldn't recognize an Asian face or a Middle Eastern face. There are a number of faces that it would go through and say, not a face, not a face, not a face, that's a face, that's a face, not a face, not a face. And so she's working on loading up the robotic system as it relates to facial recognition so that it can recognize a broader range. And if we want to get into why this matters with facial recognition, that's a different talk. We could talk more about that. But she also most recently launched another talk, because she is a poet. And so this is a 2-minute poetry session called Ain't AI a Woman? And again, you can find that on the Algorithmic Justice League site. And here's an article that the Times put out about it. So what she talks about is a series of the most influential African-American women ever. Harriet Tubman, Oprah Winfrey, Serena Williams, and the most photographed woman of color in the past 8 years, Michelle Obama. And facial recognition did not recognize any one of them. It identified them as men, animals, or does not compute. And so in her talk about Ain't AI a Woman, she's sharing, how we continue to have this bias in code. I guarantee you'll enjoy her talk. So I'm running short on time. I just want to wrap up and say, again, AI is not flawless, and this is something that we've continued to talk about. But what I want to do is kind of give you a quick message of hope, because we've talked about the problem, and we know what it is. But we also know that there's plenty that we can continue to do as we look the issue straight in the eye, and we're very intentional on how we shift. If you lead a team, if you're an individual contributor, if you work for a team that supports AI, if you just wanted to get out of the rain so you walked in here and wanted to hear this talk, all of us have a responsibility now that we've heard this information. And I hope that it resonates with you and you'll choose to do something different in ensuring that you make diversity a lifestyle in the way we build, the way we lead, and the way that we design. C.S. Lewis did a talk, not a talk, but he coined the first things first principle. And I love C.S. Lewis, and he said, this is back in 1955, he said, if we put the first things first, the second things will be thrown in. But if we put the second things first, we'll always miss the first things. So my challenge to the leaders that I work with, the people that I consult with, to myself every day as a technologist, is let's put the knowledge and the intentionality of diversity first, and then watch the second things happen with our products, and they will shift and they will change for the better. If you're just looking for general information, IEEE recently launched a global initiative for ethical considerations in artificial intelligence and autonomous solutions, and they are working on the ethics of bringing technologists, scientists, legal people together to all talk about how we can ensure that there is a better intention around how we do code. So I'll leave you with this. Tell your truth. Be honest with what you're working on every day, whether you're individually working or you're working with a team, and understand what it is that you might be doing that could be intentionally or not intentionally showcasing bias. Envision your experience. Really think about the full audience of who you're serving for. And if you don't know that, you have to go out and get help to understand who you're building and designing for so that you can create a better experience. When I say distinguish your default, I mean be honest with yourself and think about what it is that you always fall back to, because it's much harder to figure out how to design for a broader group of people. It's easy to just say, I don't know Chinese, I can't code for that, so I'm just going to stick with this. That's your default, and that's what you're always going to fall back to. I need you to design a who and decide what it is that you'll do differently. Create your game and decide to code and do work differently. Structure to win, and then take action. And then I guarantee you, we'll all be able to hear the words that are coming out of each other's mouths and design products and technologies that are the true future of the most effective voice platform that we'll have. So thanks for coming. I think I have time for a question. Do I have time for?